Hi Internet! Welcome to the Gredtroyan YouTube channel. To celebrate the release of Final Fantasy XVI, I decided to release 16 videos ranking the Final Fantasy games in a variety of categories. Each game has their strengths and weaknesses, so I thought it would be a fun way to compare and contrast the games. These lists are just my personal opinion, trying to balance objectivity and personal preference, and likely failing to satisfy anybody. So, if you disagree with my ranking, which you probably do, let me know your ranking of the subject in the comments below. For this video, I'm going to be ranking the side content in all of the main series Final Fantasy games, plus tactics. This is where I'm looking at side quests, minigames, and the like. Honestly, when it comes to my overall enjoyment of a Final Fantasy, this is a category I'm generally less concerned with. But for some fans, optional content is a big part of an RPG's appeal, and so I figured this would be another fun ranking to do. In general with side content, I tend to more heavily weigh the good stuff and ignore the bad. So, if there's a minigame I really don't like, but I can avoid it, that doesn't affect my overall score of the side content if there's stuff I really love. Unlike most of my rankings I've done in this series, this ranking will be factoring in expansion content for the MMOs. Also, if you want to avoid spoilers, you might want to skip this video, or at least skip the segments on games you don't want spoiled. You have been warned. Well, now that we've gotten the preamble out of the way, let's get into the ranking. Number 16, Final Fantasy I. Final Fantasy I is pretty bare bones in terms of side content compared to other games in the series. It makes sense, given that this was the first game in the series with a substantially lower budget than future entries, and the devs were mostly just trying to figure out what the game was, then thinking of optional stuff to add. Still, there is optional content in the game. The best side quest is easily the quest where the characters obtain a rat tail for Bahamut in order to upgrade their character classes. It almost feels like a required part of the game, but it is technically optional. There are also some super weapons in the final dungeon, but that's just loot off to the side, rather than a full-blown side quest. Remakes of the game have added a couple extra dungeons, but they never interested me much. I actually forgive Final Fantasy I for having minimal side content, given it's the first game in the series, and don't hold anything against it for being light on side quests. The side content that is there, as limited as it may be, is solid and fun. Number 15, Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III has some fun optional content, like the ability to unlock hidden summons like Odin and Leviathan through challenging boss encounters. There's also the Onion Knight acting as a hidden job in the remake you obtain through a side quest, and the remake also has a super boss you can challenge as well. Most of the side content in 3 comes from the 3D remake, but even in the original there's a bit more to do and is a definite step up from 1. I'm not one for ridiculously hard super bosses, but I do like things like finding a hidden cave under the ocean and then challenging Odin to a fight. 3 ranks above 1 on this list purely by volume. There's more side content to engage in here. Not the best in the series, but there is in fact more to do here than in Final Fantasy I. Number 14, Final Fantasy V. Final Fantasy V has a few solid memorable little side quests. A subtle one is the piano side quest where Bart gets progressively better at playing piano over the course of the game. There's not much to it, but it has charm. The most memorable piece of side content is the side quest to get the mime job, which involves diving down to the bottom of an underwater shrine in under 7 minutes and fighting the boss Go-Go, a mime who will mimic anything you do. The trick with this boss battle is pretty fun. Simply do nothing and you win the fight. It's a great little side quest. The remake of the game also adds a post-game super boss to further add to the game's lore. As far as our ranking goes, the side content is getting progressively more interesting, but we still haven't reached anything top tier for the series. Number 13, Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII's side content is basically all of the hunts on Grand Pulse. That's basically it. Most of the game is incredibly linear, but Grand Pulse does offer some room to explore, though most of it is just wide open fields. There's a little bit of story in the side quests here, but it's mostly just go find a special monster and fight it. If you're into that kind of thing, there's a lot of it here, but honestly, I find it to be a bit of a head scratcher when people say this is the best part of 13. I think it's kinda repetitive and the most overrated part of 13. Acting like the game finally gets good here feels very silly to me. There's plenty to do, sure, but it's not as good as the main campaign, at least for me. Number 12, Final Fantasy IX. Alright, now we're starting to get into the good stuff. First off, I think Tetramaster is a lot of fun. It's actually my favorite card minigame in the series, and I love challenging NPCs to play. The minigame of catching frogs in the swamp is a ton of fun too. I also enjoy the game of Red Light Green Light with Sid that you have to do at a certain point in the story. There's all kinds of fun minigames in 9, like jump rope and racing, and they don't overstay their welcome. In terms of side quests, there are 2 main ones. There's the Mognet side quest of delivering letters to Moogles, which is pretty easy to do naturally as you play through the course of the game, and it's fun to see that sub-story slowly develop. Then there's Chocobo Hot and Cold, a luck-based minigame that's fun initially, but it ends up being fairly repetitive and time-consuming. While I did ultimately enjoy the rewards obtained from the side quests, like sliding down a water slide in the Chocobo Paradise and playing cards with Fat Chocobo, the tedium of the quest doesn't seem worth it. Doing the quest does give you the ability to fight the super boss Ozma, but I'm not much of a super boss guy, or rather, I'm not into the extreme super bosses. I quite enjoy optional boss fights like the one with Hades in this game, but I don't like the mega hardcore ones. Not my bag. Technically, active time events are a form of side content given their optional nature, and I personally think they're an excellent storytelling device. It's a bit of a shame that this didn't continue in later Final Fantasy games, as it's one of the best features in any game in the series. Overall, 9 has a lot of fun side content that enriches the experience, and I'm very glad for its inclusion. If I had one criticism of the side content in the game, is that as massive as the world is, there aren't as many unique and hidden locations to find relative to the world's size. But overall, I definitely like the side content in 9. Number 11, Final Fantasy II. Final Fantasy II's remakes have an amazing post-game scenario called Soul of Rebirth that adds so much to the game that the original feels almost incomplete without its inclusion. It's a brutally difficult side campaign that is about 4 hours long, but is ultimately incredibly rewarding from a narrative experience. While an afterlife adventure might seem out of place in other Final Fantasy games, it fits like a glove into 2's story, given the Emperor's conquest of Hell in the base game being a core part of the game's narrative. It's actually really fun to have Minwu take the role of lead character, and have a party full of great characters you encountered over the course of 2's adventure, plus a brand new playable character in the form of Scott. It's a really, really great addition to the game. There are some other bonus dungeons added to the game's remakes, but the reason Final Fantasy II ranks as high as it does on this list is solely for Soul of Rebirth's great content. Number 10, Final Fantasy Tactics. Final Fantasy Tactics has a lot of great side content for an RPG with no overworld exploration. The game has some fantastic side quests, most of which reward you with a fun side story and great unlockable characters with a special job. The Race Beowulf side quest is one I find to be particularly good, and I like how they expanded the quest for the War of the Lions version. I also loved unlocking characters from other Final Fantasy games like Balthier, Luso, and Cloud. There still is a slight sense of exploration in terms of the battle maps when it comes to finding Cloud's Materia Blade and the mechanics of the super cool Midnight's Deep, but for the most part, the side content is cutscenes and battles like the rest of the game. But honestly, the quality is pretty good across the board, and if there was just a hair more exploration involved, this game's side content could easily elevate a few spots on this list. Number 9, Final Fantasy X. Look, I know that some of the minigames in Final Fantasy X are infamously hated. Nobody likes the Lightning and Chocobo minigames, I get that. But you know what? I freaking love Blitzball. It's controversial, I know a lot of folks hate it, but I think it's a really fun minigame, and I like recruiting players from all over the world to play on my team. And let me tell something to you. There are a few moments in video games where I felt as much joy as when my Besaid Aurochs beat the Luca Goers in triple overtime to win the championship trophy in my most recent playthrough of Final Fantasy X. I jumped out of my chair like it was a real sporting event from my uncontrollable celebratory jubilation. It was, quite simply, fantastic. The game also has some cool hidden areas and some super cool hidden summons like Yojimbo. The entire Yojimbo side quest is great, as it adds some great character development for Lulu, a fun new dungeon, and a great new summon at the end of it. Final Fantasy X side content has some flaws, but the stuff I don't like is pretty easy to ignore, and the stuff I like, I really, really like. Number 8, Final Fantasy XV. Final Fantasy XV has a lot of side quests. Most of them aren't very good and aren't very memorable, but there are some that I like quite a bit. Any side quest that involves taking care of a cat, I tend to be all in on. Look, I know they're overdone, but I love cats. What can I say? I'm a sucker for this kind of stuff. But there are some other more legitimately interesting side quests, like the incredibly silly Cup Noodle side quest, and the crossover quest with Terra Battle and Final Fantasy XIV. 15's massive open world has plenty of cool places to explore that are completely optional, from sewers to volcanoes to dungeons that focus solely on platforming elements. You can fish out in the open ocean and turn your car into an airship. The photo mechanic is tons of fun too. I also really like the DLC chapters in this game. Episode Arden might be the most fun part of 15, gameplay-wise. That said, Comrades is likely the least fun part of 15 gameplay-wise, with its incredibly repetitive nature. 15 side quests have some decently high highs, some low lows, but again, the high highs are fun enough for me to rank it fairly highly on this list. The bad stuff is easy enough for me to ignore. Number 7, Final Fantasy IV. Final Fantasy IV may have less side content than 15, but pretty much everything here is of high quality. While the Odin side quest in 4 is fairly similar to 3, it offers greater narrative significance and leaves a greater lasting impact on the player because of this. The Bahamut side quest has less narrative significance, but the increased challenge and excitement of the dungeon crawl helps make up for that aspect. The optional Sylph Cave and reuniting with Yang is fantastic, as is entering the Land of Summons, getting great additional context for Rydia's journey, a brand new location, and new powerful summons to join your team. The Ultimate Weapon side quest is simple, yet satisfying, and the 3D remake offers a nice and humorous side quest involving Namenway, who can now no longer name characters due to the advent of voice acting, and thus goes on a soul-searching journey to discover his true self. I also really like the Hidden Development Room, where you can talk to the game's creators. Honestly, I like basically all of the side content there is in Final Fantasy IV. They all either flesh out the world and characters, offer great rewards, are funny, fun, or some combination of the bunch. 4's side content is really great. Number 6. Final Fantasy XII. I'm honestly not too big on the hunts in Final Fantasy XII. They do offer a lot better story content than the hunts in 13, but given my general lack of interest in most of 12, I didn't bother diving into them too much. However, I know the general community loves the hunts in 12, and I do recognize them of being higher quality side quests, so even if they don't vibe with me as much, I can't rank them any lower than the top 6, because I'm able to objectively say that the side quests are high quality. You can not like basketball and admit that Michael Jordan is a great player. I can be not that into 12 and admit the side content is great. Like I said, I only dabbled briefly with the side content when I played the game. 12 took me the longest of any of the games to beat its main campaign, clocking in at 80 hours on the PS2 version, and a lot of it is due to how sluggish the battles are. Yes, I did some grinding, but not a ton. By the time I got to the end of the game, I was just kinda over Final Fantasy XII and didn't feel like doing side quests. I feel if I got the Zodiac version and could 4 times speed the battles, I would be more apt to give the side content a try and elevate it even higher on this list. But, based on my experience with the PS2 version, the number 6 spot feels good for Final Fantasy XII side quests. Number 5. Final Fantasy VIII. Final Fantasy VIII side content is arguably the best part of the game. The game is overflowing with great side content. Tomb of the Unknown King doesn't require you to fully explore its depths to continue on with the game, but if you do, you'll find a great early game puzzle and a fantastic additional summon to add to your roster. And speaking of optional early game content, the fact that you can fight Diabolos as early as you can in the game is fantastic. It's a super hard boss battle, but the rewards for unlocking him are amazing, and are a big step forward on your journey to becoming a god through manipulation of the junction system. In general, Final Fantasy VIII has a lot of great hidden GFs, most of which can be drawn from bosses. But let's look at some more optional locations. The underwater facility is full of great puzzles, challenging fights, and incredible rewards. Katdor Island is full of fun, and the fight with the Jumbo Katdor is hilarious. I love how the boss fight can troll you by running away when you're close to defeating him, and forcing you to redo the whole process of summoning the boss all over again. In other games I would be mad about such a mechanic, but it's done in such a quirky and funny way where I just laughed at the troll and thought it was great. I love farming Tonberries to summon the Tonberry King, and I loved the battle with Odin. I also love how it incorporates later into a fight with Cypher. So many of these rare summons are just hanging out in cool locations in the game, with very little narrative explanation, but huge narrative implication, just further adding to 8's weird charm. There's even a UFO side quest. This stuff is bonkers, and it's awesome. But let's not forget the most popular minigame in the series, Triple Triad. If you want, you can essentially just turn the plot of Final Fantasy VIII into Yu-Gi-Oh!, where the main story is Squall, trying to become a card master, while on the side falling in love and fighting a sorceress. 8's side content is patently absurd, and also very, very fun. It's the best part of the game, and it's really fantastic. I love it. Number 4. Final Fantasy VI. Like Final Fantasy XII, I'm not huge on the side content in Final Fantasy VI. A lot of stuff that feels like it should be mandatory to the main story is technically side content. The game already has lots of optional characters to recruit in general, but the fact that most of the mandatory cast from the first part of the game technically becomes optional characters in the World of Ruin means this game has a ton of side content, as the second half of the game is structured in a way where it's basically all technically side quests. In order to recruit your characters back, you need to do a side quest for each of them in the World of Ruin, offering the party members mini narrative arcs that do add a lot more story to the game. Personally, I found the World of Ruin to be tedious and momentum killing with its pacing, even if I ended up liking a lot of the individual vignettes and set pieces. A lot of people love it, and even though I might personally prefer the side content in 8, I can't deny the incredible fan reception this part of the game has. And beyond that, there's tons of other side content that is very legitimately purely side content, like the Colosseum, the Auction House, the Ancient Castle, unlocking Ultima, fighting Doomgaze. There's a lot here. While a lot of it I'm not into, there's plenty I do legitimately like, and that, plus the positive fan reception, elevates it to the number 4 spot on this list. Number 3, Final Fantasy VII. When it comes to the offline Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy VII is the king of minigames. There's a snowboarding minigame, a motorcycle minigame, a submarine minigame, a roller coaster rail shooter minigame, a squat minigame, a chocobo racing minigame, a chocobo breeding minigame, a Moogle breeding minigame. So many minigames. Are they all good? Not really. But they're all fun and have goofy charm to them, and it's great to just hang around the gold saucer and enjoy the virtual amusement park. But 7's optional content isn't strictly limited to minigames that break from the core gameplay mechanics. No, there's plenty of great side quests, and I think the fact that 7 has only 2 optional characters makes them feel more significant than the optional characters in 6, and the amount of trouble you need to go through in order to get the characters make you really feel like you're stumbling across something special. Either the very specific question and answer game you play with Yuffie, or the mysterious puzzle solving in Shinra Manor to unlock Vincent, and both offer great side quests that further flesh out their backstories. Yuffie's Wutai side quest in particular is fantastic, and feels like a fully fleshed out chapter of the main story. There's also the hidden Zack cutscene, which is really, really great, and one of the best scenes in Final Fantasy VII. There's great hidden rewards in this game, like unlocking Bahamut Zero based upon your success in the huge materia missions, and I love unlocking the optional limit breaks and ultimate weapons for the characters. It's not just unlocking better gear, but also better skills with flashy combat animations that become core parts of the gameplay experience. And though chocobo breeding may be a pain in the butt, it's worth it once you finally get Knights of the Round and summon it for the first time. The rewards for the side content in this game are truly fantastic. For those more battle-inclined, there's the Colosseum and some epic super bosses in the form of Ruby Weapon and Emerald Weapon. 7 side content is a great mix of fun diversions, additional characters, extra gear, extra skills, additional story content, and so much more. Some of the controls for the minigames are a little clunky and outdated, but overall, 7 side content is top-notch for the series. Number 2, Final Fantasy XI. Final Fantasy XI is a stupidly huge game. MMOs are filled to the brim with content in general, and Final Fantasy XI has more than 20 years worth of content for the player to consume. There's numerous job classes to master, tons of high-end gear to grind towards, hundreds upon hundreds of side quests, and numerous expansion packs the length of an average Final Fantasy game. There's just so much in 11, and it can be hard to explain to someone who never played the game just how much stuff there is in it. Let me offer an example. There are easily over 100 different kinds of currencies you can use for various specific rewards in the game. Yes, Gil is still a thing, but there's more than 100 different kinds of currency that has specific requirements to obtain, and you need said currency to trade for very specific rewards, some of which ends up being related to mainline story quests in the expansion packs. And honestly, there's probably way more than 100 currencies, but I didn't feel like counting any further after getting to 100. There are so many optional dungeons and special instance battles. New story content is continually being added, and the current storyline, at the time of this video, the Voracious Resurgence, is actually really good. It's stupidly difficult, because they assume you've beaten all the other expansions, I have, and 11 is already a really hard game to begin with, but it's a lot of fun. There's no shortage of things to do in Final Fantasy XI. Yes, obviously the side content category is stacked in favor of the MMOs, but if side content is your jam, you can't do much better than Final Fantasy XI. Except for maybe Final Fantasy XIV. Number 1, Final Fantasy XIV. Look, I love Final Fantasy XI, but a lot of 11's side content is really, really grindy and really, really hard. And a lot of it isn't all that fun. It can lead to some cool stuff in the story and some cool gear, sure, but the process for getting to some of those rewards can be a bit of a chore. Final Fantasy XI is, for the most part, meant for really hardcore players. I'm not a hardcore player, and it's actually kind of weird I like 11 as much as I do, but my point is the intense grind and difficulty is not for everyone. 14's content, on the other hand, is for everyone. 14 offers side content that's both great for casual players and the most hardcore of the hardcore. And like 11, there's a ton of stuff to dive into. The Gold Saucer from Final Fantasy VII has returned, and it's full of minigames, including Final Fantasy VIII's Triple Triad. 14, like 11, has plenty of expansions and side quests. Both games have crafting, gear customization, and house customization, but 14 makes most of it more accessible, aside from the housing. And the process is a lot more fun and streamlined than 11's. There are tons of job classes you can try, and people love logging in for their daily roulettes to get good EXP, gil, and item rewards. It's an MMO with constant updates, so it has an unfair advantage against the single-player games, but that's specifically what MMOs are designed for. 14 ultimately edges out 11 because the side content is more fun for a general audience and doesn't have the layers of frustration a lot of 11's content does. And thus, Final Fantasy XIV wins this ranking for best side content in the Final Fantasy series. Thanks for watching this video. Again, these lists are my personal opinion, and I'm definitely curious to see you guys posting your rankings in the comments below. Be sure to do the YouTube things, the liking, the subscribing, etc. And if you like this video, don't forget to check out the other rankings in the series. Thanks for watching, and I hope you find peace and happiness in your life. Cheers!